Lord, yes, papi, hit me one time and make it funky.
I was brought up and told to have no fear. I was brought up and told to have no fear. I was brought up and told to have no fear.
Welcome to the Full Circle Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, David Roberts, along with the oral historian, Andre Taylor. Hopefully, the OG Dr. Neil Holmes will be joining us shortly, having some technical difficulties here. But Dre, last week we were talking and you mentioned there was a change in the Ahmaud Arbery case. So what's going on with that?
Well, the son that was involved in the shooting, one of the McMichaels, said he was getting death threats from inmates in the Georgia State Penitentiary, where he still has some time to serve. And he was requesting that he not serve his time there, but serve it in a federal prison because he felt as though people were going to be hunting him down to kill him, and he didn't want to die. And the irony of it is, you hunted somebody down and killed them, and they didn't want to die. So now all of a sudden it's okay for you. And his lawyers put forth the request because they were found guilty in not just the state court, but also in the federal court. And it's just like the irony, the audacity to say, I want to go ahead and preserve my life for my family, when you purposely hunted somebody down and took theirs from their family. And I found it interesting that it speaks to the society we live in and have lived in, where white offenders want preferential treatment to preserve their lives. And I was frustrated with that when I saw that.
And the interesting thing is, I wouldn't shed any tears. I don't wish harm on anyone, but I wouldn't shed any tears if something happened to him, honestly. But he'll probably win that motion because the prison system, or whoever the powers that be, they do have to protect people. If a cop goes to prison, they're usually not in general population because they know that wouldn't last. Yep. So, if he doesn't win, I guess his only choice is to hook up with the Aryan Nation, why he's in prison, and try to get that protection. Because I thought it was interesting when Jeffrey Dahmer was murdered in prison. And again, he was psychotic, murdered a lot of people, shed no tears for his death. But I was like, it seemed okay, good. Dr. Holmes is joining us. But it did seem like, from that perspective, them being an authority, like they could have protected him better.
Right.
So it makes you wonder, did they want that to happen? Dr. Holmes, what's going on?
Oh, not too much. How you doing?
Hey, pretty good. Right now we're discussing one of the, I guess, convicts in the Ahmaud Arbery lynching, I should say, is requesting that, he be moved to federal prison because he doesn't want to die. He's been getting death threats, so that's what we were talking about. And just saying that, I guess the government legally, they do have a duty to protect this guy. And personally, I'd like to see him do his time. To me, death is an easy way out. When I see somebody that does something like this and they be like, they're going to get the death penalty. Well, I'm like, at least I hope they do 15 years on death row first, before being put to death. And same thing with him. I actually do want him to do some time in prison, as punishment for what he did. He just took an innocent life, crazy, profiled him, took his life. So I'm just glad they were all convicted, and again, if something happens to him in prison, I don't hope for that, but I won't lose sleep over that.
Not at all.
Doc, what's your take on this?
Well, he doesn't want to go to state prison. He wants to go to federal prison, because historically federal prisons have been a little safer. But there's just been reports out of Atlanta Federal Prison, where they took Garvey back in 22 or whatever that year was. And which is actually his birthday. Actually, today is Marcus Garvey's birthday.
Oh,
Yeah,
Marcus.
and they just had actually put a sister in charge of that particular federal facility. And there's all kinds of sexual violence going on there, physical violence going on there. So basically, what this guy is really saying, and what those people in January 6th said, when they went to DC jails, was that, basically that we have awful prison system here. Now, the problem with Arbery and those January 6th people was they always wanted bad prisons as long as it was full of us in there.
Right.
But the United States has a horrible prison system. And one of the reasons it's horrible is because this whole legacy of slavery and colonialism that our people have, so yeah, so in equality, we talk about equality. We always talk about equality of African people getting the good stuff. We need, the good jobs, good this and that and other, but also need equality for whites getting some of the bads. And so, yeah, he needs to experience this stuff.
What's interesting when you talk about, and I know we start talking about these issues coming, we'll go in different directions. When you talk about America having a horrible prison system, I'm not trustworthy of television and the media because I feel like it's one of the main tools of white supremacy. But one of the shows I watch is Locked Up Abroad. And when they show these prisons in some of these other countries, it makes the American prisons look like paradise. Now, of course, that's a TV show, so who knows how real that is? But they definitely make American prisons and look nice, if that's the proper term, and make our justice system seem great.
Well, it depends on what you're comparing them with. If you're comparing the United States with a country that has poor, very extremely poor country that's run by some dictators that have been put in place by the United States. Yeah, but if you compare the United States to Japan or to Sweden or something like that, you're going to get you get a better comparison. You have a better basis for comparison. And even in those places, as they increase the number of Africans living in those countries, you begin to see deterioration in prisons. You begin to see a weakening of the social welfare state. And as long as the country, let's say, like Sweden, was all Swedish and white, free schools, free college education, great public housing, great public health care was taken for granted for everybody and thought it was a great thing. But then when you begin to get too many Africans, too many Arabs coming in, then people want to start privatizing their welfare state system. So and become more like the United States. So I mean, a lot of times we compare the United States with somebody in its own category. We tend to compare the United States with somebody in a different category. This country is a wealthy country with plenty of wealth. So the prisons, first of all, shouldn't be that populated, because if the wealth was spread around a little bit more, and but the prisons should be in great shape. You can't compare that to a country where you have people outside prison don't have a lot to eat, so you don't expect people inside the prison to have great diets.
Right. Now, speaking of people that should be in prison, just 8 days ago, it was decided that the Justice Department won't be seeking to indict Carolyn Bryant. Now, Carolyn Bryant was the one who lied on Emmett Till, and we know she lied because she admitted that she lied, that she just made up a story, told in an interview to the New York Times. She said she made up everything, and when I saw that they declined to indict her, it just made me think about when her husband, Roy Bryant, and his brother killed Emmett Till. They were acquitted and then told their story to, I think, Look magazine for, I think, like $4,000. And we're talking about $4,000 in 1955. I think you could have bought a house with $4,000 in 1955, So, and of course, I guess they were idiots because they didn't, translate that into any economic, prosperity later on. They both, went on to live pretty unremarkable lives. But it just was interesting to me that they declined to indict Carolyn Bryant after admitting that she lied. And personally, I think this is a woman that should die in prison. She's already gotten a reprieve, 50 plus years. And I think she should die in prison because I want to see justice, some type of justice for Emmett Till's family.
I thought this would have happened sooner because I remember she made the admission in Timothy Tyson's book that he had written about the blood of Emmett Till. And I remember that book and I remember reading it, and it was just like, I can't believe that you're actually admitting this. It's like, this is an admission of guilt in a situation. And I don't believe that there is a time frame for this type of crime. Some time goes by, you steal some crackers out of a store, some juice out of a store, fine. But in the commission of a felony that ends in a murder of an individual, you were complicit in this because you were the one who got the ball rolling. And that's how I thought how the court system saw it. And then I realized that they see it that way when people look a certain way, when somebody is killed in the commission of a crime. You definitely got the ball rolling, and you went into hiding. You lived you lived your life. You were able to see birthdays, see family,
right.
Attend graduation. I mean, you got to do all the things that Emmett Till never got to do because of your actions, your lies. So I agree with you. There's just no way. I thought for sure she would have ended up in a prison, and we'd be talking about her dying one day in prison, and they make the big news about it. But we're not going to get that.
No, it doesn't seem like there's going to be any justice at all, even though that would just be a sliver of justice. But, always felt for Mamie Till, she went to her grave, with nothing. And I'm sure that's what she was fighting for her entire life.
Yeah. And the other thing is, there are literally thousands of cases that we don't know about. And there's a sister who's, I think she's a lawyer, who's in the process of trying to dig up these cases. One case, and I think she was related to a person in this case. I don't know I think we might have talked about it in the show once. I think this was in Texas. And it was a county in Texas where this young brother just got back from the military. And he went with his two cousins to, we used to have a lot of little, in the South, in the country, we had a lot of little joints you could go to and get something to eat and dance and play some music and whatnot. So they went in there to celebrate, put some money in the jukebox and danced. And there's some couple of white guys who are angry because that local county had decided to increase the funding for the black school. Didn't want to integrate the school. They just want to increase the funding for the school. And so they just drove and killed the first black person they saw. They drove and saw him. They saw him dancing in that place, and shot him. And yeah, literally thousands, probably, of those cases. And we always talk about the South, but they're all over the country. These unknown cases have to be, there are people who are dealing with some of these unknown cases as well. But now Now, if you compare, you could, compare what happened with Emmett Till and this particular situation with I guess the grand jury not returning anything, and you compare that to how the Nazis are dealt with in this country. You can have a Nazi who's 95 years old,
Right.
and you'll send him to Israel to go to jail. Now, part of that is because um, you have a state system in the sense of a country called Israel that actually has a government and all that has taken it upon itself to do that sort of thing. And you also have a group of people who have integrated themselves into this society quite a bit. And so our inability at this particular point to make these things happen is a reflection of two things. One, we don't have a state that actually speaks up for us. And that's why I talk about, this. And when we think about Marcus Garvey birthday today, this is what he was all about. People say back to Africa. That was only part of it. It wasn't a big part of either. Even he said, basically his thing was, if there is a country somewhere in the world that can, because when he was out and doing his thing, there are only two sort of semi-independent countries, three: Haiti, Liberia, and Ethiopia in the world. And I say semi-independent because Haiti and Liberia are underfoot of the United States, and Ethiopia had some recognition, but it was about to be invaded by the Italians, and it didn't have the economic wherewithal to really do sort of things necessary to be done. So, so these, so he was saying, where's our country that's going to speak up for us? We want respect in the world. We want all these things, but we have to have a state that is some entity with weapons, arms, that can intervene on our behalf. And that's what's lacking when we compare our situation to other situations, the situation. Now, I'm not saying we should do what the people did who set up Israel, to go in and kick out another group of people and step on them in order to get your rights,
Right.
But what I am saying is that simply integrating into a burning and corrupt house is not going to be sufficient. It's not going to get us the kind of protections that we need and that we deserve.
And it's funny, and not funny, but interesting, I should say, when you say that, because I remember, reading about Marcus Garvey, studying Marcus Garvey. And of course, the government brought him down, but they also had the help of like W.E.B. Du Bois.
Right.
And I admired Dr. Du Bois, but I disagree with that. But I think his thinking at that time, we were just like not even 50 years out of slavery. And I guess their thinking was, we built this prosperous nation, so now we need to integrate into this nation and take advantage of that prosperity. But I wonder if, like, that was over 100 years ago, if people, if the majority of our people are starting to see where that was an error, in a way, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, Du Bois when he made mistakes, he made big mistakes. He didn't make small mistakes. That was one. Back in Woodrow Wilson was another one. Opposing Garvey in Liberia was another one, and he supported Firestone actually going into Liberia, and which sunk Liberia economically for a long time. But he and a number of others, you know, some really great people, had this Garvey Must Go campaign.
Mhm.
And it was twofold. One, they didn't like the idea of this Jamaican. It was an ethnic thing. It was Africans from the United States versus Jamaicans or West Indians.
Which we still have today.
Yeah, which we still have, and it happens on both ends of this thing.
Right.
And but also this thing of a kind of a bourgeois, kind of petty bourgeois leadership, which which didn't see the role, because we think about Du Bois. Du Bois lived up to be, I think, 95 years old, something like that, 93,
Mhm.
95. And so there were a lot of different Du Boises. I mean, there were some key threads, but Du Bois changed from time to time. And when we think about Du Bois of the teens and the 20, you know, that period, it's not the same as the Du Bois of the 60s and late 50s and late 40s, even. And so he was not that much of an integrationist, Du Bois, though. I mean, he was and he wasn't.
Mhm.
I mean, because he got kicked off the board of the NAACP, the organization he helped to found, because he opposed this idea of school integration. He said, you know, the only thing keeping us from having great schools is we don't have confidence. And why are you going to, he said this in the 30s, he said, why are you going to take a black child, he probably said Negro child, and sit them in a classroom with a teacher who despises them? You know, why would you do that? So it wasn't just the integration thing, but it was the fact that class thing and that ethnic, you know, that nationality, ethnic competition thing, which wasn't revolutionary competition, because you can do revolutionary competition. You can say, well, who's going to do the most for the entire African world? We compete and see who does the best.
Mhm.
But wasn't that. So I think, you know, Du Bois was, you know, was part of that. And they sent, you know, they got, and they went to the government actually, and had, you know, and they were part of the people who actually said, let's get this guy out of here.
And you know what was interesting, since we're talking about Du Bois, I remember for the longest, you know, I was kind of like a Du Bois, for lack of a better word, fan,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I thought Booker T. Washington was a sellout. But you evolve over the years, and I definitely understand what Booker T. Washington was talking about, you know. And some people, I was a Muslim brother recently, he said in the 60s, we made the mistake of going for civil rights instead of silver rights. Like we should have just been building up our, you know, economy, as opposed to, like you said, running into this burning house.
Well, we needed both. I mean,
Mhm.
it's not. I mean, you can't have the problem with Booker T. Washington. You see, Booker T. Washington and Du Bois needed each other. You can't have, even if you can't have an economic base in this country unless you have some political power. You know, that's what happened with the Booker T. Washington did a great job in terms of, in many ways, in terms of building a school system in all over the rural South. I was a beneficiary personally of Booker T. Washington's work, because I started school in one of those schools that he was able to help get organized in the South, and built that economy. But at the same time, all of that stuff came under attack. You had to have some political wherewithal to protect that stuff. So you need both. You need politics, and you need economy, and you have to have more than just a bourgeois economy. And Du Bois had, I mean, Booker T had more than that, actually. I was talking to a brother last night. You know, he went into Lowndes County, Alabama, where the Black Panther Party actually was founded, you know, by Kwame Ture. Lowndes County Freedom Organization called them, you had the Black Panther symbol. And but prior to that, he and George Washington Carver had gotten together like 4,000 or 2,000, 4,000 acres for black farmers, and they formed a co-op to do it. And they had a revolving loan fund. You'd buy some land, put the money in the fund, and the next farmer buy some land, put the money in the fund, and they ended up with those farmers. Now, those farmers were able to have an economic base and whatnot, but the county was still run by white folks for a long time, up until the 60s. It was a majority black county, and so they couldn't do everything they wanted to do, even though they had the land and had their farms. So you had to have some politics.
You know, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Doc.
You had to have some politics too. So you need both of them, and then you need to update both of them.
Right.
Both of them had their own Africa program, and you need that. You have to have an international program. Both of them had an international program, and you need that. So it's not one or the other, but
Right.
you need both. And even with both, you need to update what they did for what we need to do. Both of them needed to be a little more radical. Yeah, you can understand Booker T being conservative in a sense because what's his name, the poet Langston Hughes said he had his head in the lion's mouth the whole time he was in the South. He understood he had his head in the lion's mouth, but he built a good thing, which was Tuskegee. And it was worth it. So you got to kind of look within the time period and whatnot. But we need an economic base, and we need a political base.
Now, Dre, I want to come to you because to piggyback off Doc's point, being that you were, at an HBCU, did, your undergrad at HBCU, were Booker T and W.E.B. Du Bois ever discussed, or like, was Booker T. Washington held in high regard at Cheney, or did it ever come up?
Yeah, it came up in Dr. Holmes' class. So it came up there. Actually it came up at Temple too. And it's interesting because when I was considering schools for my PhD work, you go to UMass Amherst, and W.B. Du Bois is revered, and that's where his collection is housed housed there. But then my interaction with this area, when you think about Booker T. Washington, you think about Hampton Institute, a lot of people here, the dynamics are different. And it's like in the Philadelphia area, it's like, oh, W.E.B. Du Bois. And it's just like, well, why? And it's like, well, he wrote this book, The Philadelphia Negro, and it must be about us. And you consider his work at University of Pennsylvania.
Right.
And it's just like, you see this individual that was able to get into places that most people at that time were not allowed into.
Right.
Then you come here, and it's just like, this is the blue collar aspect of it. You work from the dirt up, and then you have the Rosenwald schools in places that are like Gloucester here in Virginia. And it's like, it's definitely a shift. Whereas though Booker T. Washington is revered more here than he is in the northern states, and vice versa for W.B. Du Bois. So that was interesting. But then when we had Dr. Holmes' class, we learned about that. That was the first time I heard the term the bourgeoisie, and I'm like, well, who are we talking about? And next, here we are. We talking about W.E.B. So it's just interesting, and especially being older now and looking at the contributions, that the two made. But I agree with Doc. You had an opportunity to go to schools because he came and made sure that there were schools that were developed for people of color to go, to make sure we had a place to get an education. And in fact, I'm on a committee now where they're trying to revitalize and restore one of the Rosenwald schools here in Gloucester. So I'm getting to work closely with these individuals who were impacted directly because they had a school in a place where they weren't supposed to be learning.
Right. I went to a Rosenwald school, and they call him Rosenwald School because you had this guy Rosenwald from Sears who had this money. He was a millionaire, I guess, back in those days. He probably would have been a billionaire today. And he said, well, I want to do something with this money. So he talked to Booker T. Washington. And Washington said, we can build these schools.
Mhm.
He said, but when we build them, this is what we have to do. I don't want you to give this money to the Black community. We have to have a partnership. It has to be a three-way partnership. So you put in some money, the Black community puts some money in, the white community puts some money in, has to put some money in. And so what that meant was that we had ownership into the schools, and the white community would have to have some support for Black education, at least some minimal support. And so in my area, we put the African community in my area put in 80% of the money. Put in 10%, Rosenwald put in 10%, and the white community put in 10%. And that 10% the white community put in, some of that was our taxes. We also put the land which was I don't know how many, 10, 15 acres, that was given by a Black man. So that was a couple of economists a few years ago said that these Rosenwald schools increased Black educational attainment by over a third. It's like so, and some of the buildings were designed by what's his name, Frank Lloyd Wright. So that you had a Tuskegee plan for the buildings, which said you had to have so much sunlight, so much fresh air, it had to be oriented a certain way, and the sorts of things that people are doing now in schools, saying, well, let's have the kids learn biology and botany by growing things, raising animals, all that was part of the education approach. So this is it was a pretty it was good. It was it wasn't everything was necessary, but the best teachers I've ever had came out of that school. And again, the way it was explained to us by one of our teachers, I remember we had a program, I think it was a Black History, a Negro History Week program. And he explained it like this. He said, okay, Booker T. Washington, some people believe that Booker T. Washington was a Uncle Tom, but he was sort of this thing that this individual that allowed these resources to come in so we could do the sorts of things that we are doing. And when he was saying what he was saying, I was thinking in my mind, I got this picture of Booker T as like this big umbrella that was kind of protecting us. So we were doing stuff that and having discussions that white folks definitely wouldn't have us have. And I'm so happy that I didn't have to go to an integrated school, because we critiqued. I mean, if you ever look at the history books that I had that 7th grade history book and the 4th grade history book, Virginia history books, those are infamous in terms of how they dealt with things like slavery and Civil War and maintaining that fiction of the lost cause. And the Black teachers fought that, and they fought the book publicly. I mean, and they fought it in the classroom, and those ideas were contested. I had students later, when I came to Virginia to teach in university here, kids who never had a Black teacher, or maybe one Black teacher in their whole career, and they were exposed to all this knuckleheaded stuff, and they got big doses of it. They're still getting big doses of this crap that we had. It was shot down our schools, hundreds of years ago. I mean, when I was in, 50, 60 years ago when I was in school. So, it's see a little bit of both, but both Booker T and Du Bois have had their limitations also. We can't, and it's not just, Booker T wasn't the most right-wing person. There were a lot of people further to the right, much more conservative than Booker T in the country. You had black folks who were saying slavery was a good thing. Booker T never said that. And on the other hand, Du Bois was not the most left-wing person. On the other hand, and they were the thing that we hear, and both of them were bourgeois, right? In many ways, Booker T was the kind of bourgeois you would like to have, a national bourgeois who builds an economy and builds up the economy, builds up businesses and that stuff. It does the responsibility of a bourgeois. If a bourgeoisie does that responsibility, then the revolutionary can later come along and overturn them. But these, when Booker T did that speech down in Atlanta that everybody got all angry about, Du Bois loved it because Du Bois was going to his Du Bois was a cultural nationalist, and Booker T was an economic nationalist. And that's where they were. What kind of nationalism are you going to have? Booker T said one time, he said, if we learn to cooperate, if the Negro learns to cooperate, we can have a strong nation within a nation. He was a nationalist.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Du Bois was also a nationalist, but Booker T believed that nationalism, you build a nationalism around the businessman. Du Bois believed you built that nationalism around the learned class, the intelligentsia. Both of them were probably wrong. You build that nation among the masses,
right,
of the people. I mean, Du Bois. I mean, both of them worked among the masses in their own way at their own time. I mean, Booker T. He would go. He and Carter, George Washington Carter would go sleep and stay in the farmers. He'd teach them new methods of farming and so forth, which is extremely important in that area, and bring them in and organize them into doing work collectively and do what he calls object lessons. So you'd have a kid go out into the country, and you go to an area where if there wasn't a school, you build a school because you learn carpentry. So now you can build a school. And let's say the school meets 3 months out of the year. Next year, you wanted to meet 6 months and so forth. And you build a house and would use flowers for decoration and beautification, and have a garden that can supply you now with a varied and healthy diet, where before you were running into town buying canned goods, canned food from the white man, spending the little money that you had. So these are kind of practical things that helped us survive. So where I grew up, everybody had a garden. Now you have more gardens in the city than you have in the country where I grew up. And everybody had a pig or pigs in their backyard. Almost everybody had pigs and chickens and things. And so you had good fresh meat. You had meat. Then, people, you had people who would trap things, and, some people would hunt or fish. And so you had a varied, healthier diet than people have today, because we had nice gardens and fresh food that didn't have all these contaminants in there. And all this lowered our reliance on outside forces. Du Bois, on the other hand, did some of his best speaking at Union Local. So here you had this guy with all these Harvard degrees, and he really didn't care about that Harvard degree. He was pissed off, really. One reason he's pissed off at Booker T, he wanted that degree from Germany, because the German degree was, the Germans looked at Harvard as it was, small potatoes. And he never did finish his German doctorate because the organization that he was getting money from, he needed to go one extra year for, and the German organization, the organization back in the U.S. that was giving him money, decided now that they're going to spend more money on the industrial schools, like what Booker T was championing in the U.S. So he never got to complete that second year, which would give him that German PhD. But he had all those degrees, but you would find him at a union local talking to union members and giving them some of the history and so forth. He lived in the South as well for a while. He taught in public school in the South for a while. And the way public teachers did back in those days, they would board with a family and he'd they'd put up a little curtain, put up a little sheet to give you a little privacy in a house cabin, and he did that as well. So both of them were necessary, but it's not an either or thing. We need to have collective economics, because we can't do it the typical capitalist way. We don't have the kind of capital. And then we need collective political thing. We need democratic rights, the right to vote and all these other things, run for office. But then thirdly, we need to have the Africa, unified Africa, that both of them were interested in. Booker T worked in the Congo. He was early on one of the guys in the Congo who fought strong against Congolese colonialism. Was somebody who worked under Booker T. Du Bois as well. Both of them fought along those lines. So we need a unified, strong Africa, but we also need socialism, which Du Bois came to later in life, and which actually Booker T was beginning to explore, because he went to Europe, Eastern Europe, and came into contact with socialism. He came to the U.S. He went to a meeting in New York, and to see what the socialism was all about. It wasn't that he was going to cast it off, but he said all he did was complain. He didn't see him having Du Bois was sort of a practical guy, and if you didn't have a practical program, he didn't, if all you're going to do is talk about stuff, you didn't have a practical program, then he didn't have much time for you. But he was willing to explore it. George Washington Carver said, socialism is the new spiritualism of the age. Wrote a letter about that. So, so we need the economics, collective. We need the politics, collective. Overall, we need a socialist Africa, a united socialist Africa, and then those things we can win.
And it's interesting whenever how socialism still is such a bad word in America. Like when Obama was just talking about spreading the wealth, and he was just talking about having the rich pay their fair share of taxes. Then you had these conservatives yelling, "Oh, he's a socialist. He's a socialist." Like that's such a bad thing, but it's really not. When you think about it.
Yeah.
So that's just interesting. But some people that could benefit from it, they buy into it as well.
Yeah. What's that name of that school in Gloucester?
I forget the name right off. I know it's one of the Rosenwald. I forget the exact name of it. But we have another meeting coming up in 2 weeks, so I'll be back out there.
Oh, okay, good. Because we used to have a really Virginia was something. Virginia was one of the 6 or 7 states, mostly in the South and Midwest, where teachers were better. African teachers, Black teachers were better trained than white teachers. Had higher, more degrees. Under the what do you call it? The so-called segregationist system, because you couldn't go to graduate school in the state, because all the graduate programs were at white schools like William and Mary and whatnot. Then they would pay you full freight to go to graduate education up north. So, and most of where we went were to Ivy League schools, Columbia. I mean, good school. I had 2 cousins who went to University of Pennsylvania. One got a master's degree, one got a PhD. I mean, got a doctorate, what do you call it, EDD, from Penn, paid for by the state of Virginia. Came back here to teach. So our teachers in my county and were higher, had a higher education attainment than the white teachers. They didn't need that much education because all they had to do was leave school, maybe go somewhere if they really wanted to go to like Virginia Tech or UVA or William and Mary someplace. But basically what they had to do was go up, take over the father's farm or take over the little business, or, something local, go into the plant. They had it set up. So they didn't need a whole lot of that stuff. So, that was one of the interesting things that you find in this state of Virginia. We actually had a triple system because we had a Native American school as well in our county, which was very interesting.
They were finishing schools, right? Like trying to make the Native Americans more, they would say American, but they were the original.
Well, it wasn't like that. It wasn't. It was more like they controlled us. It was like our school. They had Native American teachers and whatnot, from what I understand. And but it wasn't like Carlisle up in Pennsylvania. I've been up there at Carlisle School, and it wasn't like that where you would bring Native Americans from all over the country, and you have. I mean, some of that assimilation was going on, but some of that assimilation, that group that set up that school, they were Christian and all of that, but they were also proud of their Native American heritage. And they maintained it at that school, and they maintained it at their church. That church was the school were right in the same spot. And so they maintained a certain heritage of resistance and cultural continuity and history in that school and in that church, although the church itself was, I think, a Baptist church or something. But so it was a combination of those things.
Well,
like when we they were trying to make us, non whatever.
Exactly. Which brings me to probably the last point. We can make this our last discussion topic. And hopefully we won't go too long. Just see how spirited you guys are about this, because we might have different opinions. Do you think Dr. Umar Johnson will ever get his school off the ground? Will that school
Absolutely
ever be
not. Absolutely not. I have seen where he wanted the first school, and we saw the fundraising, but it never came to fruition. And so I think a lot of people, at least in my circle, I have a lot of people like, oh, Dr. Umar Johnson, I said, Dr. Umar Johnson ain't doing nothing. He out here, he got his points coming across on social media and YouTube and all that, and that's fine. But I mean, as far as actually moving forward to build an educational institution for our people, I do not see that ever happening with him.
What about you, Doc? You got any opinion?
Well, I don't really follow him too much, and I'm not too much on the social media stuff. But I thought he had a school in Delaware.
I don't know. He had
didn't have a school in Dover or something.
I think he had purchased a building, and but it just needed so much makeover, and he was still trying to raise funds for that.
Oh, I thought he already had a school down there. I don't know, so I can't speak on it because I know nothing of it. But I thought he had a school in Dover, Delaware.
It just seems like he might be just a little maybe too controversial. Some he claims lineage to Frederick Douglass. People question that. People question his PhD. And I don't know which is right. I'm just saying that generally speaking, people question him. And I think after so much fundraising and there's no school, it's like going to that church 20 years and they got that building fund going on for 20 years, like, all right, this is for the building fund, and you ain't seen a doorknob built. And so I think that's just a concern. I was rooting for the school. I wanted to see like a Pan-Africanist, open a school, similar to some of the Nation of Islam schools. I don't necessarily agree with everything the Nation of Islam espouses, but I see what their schools do for young Black men. And it seems to be, a lot of positive things going on. So I was looking forward to his school. That's why I just,
Oh, we already got those. We already have them. I mean, you go out west. I mean, you go out to LA, you had the Garvey School.
Right.
You had kids in the 2nd and 3rd grade doing algebra, but they were learning 3 languages in those schools.
Right. And I thought Dr. Umar Johnson would be kind of like have the same impact. And I just feel like we need more of those. And since he was kind of high profile, I was hoping that this school would be open and then become like a model for others to, replicate.
Well, the model, in our area, the way it worked, in the beginning, somebody would come and get under a tree and start teaching some children. And then the community would begin to support that. You gave a service first, and then you got to support. The other thing, maybe we can have him on this program sometime, is the gentleman who was a Baptist minister. He later started an African based church based on African religion called Wose Church out in California. And at one point he said, we need a school.
Mm-hmm.
And so the church itself began to do the things necessary to put the school together. And they had their students do very well. I don't think it goes all the way to high school. I think it goes to middle school or something. But those students do extremely well. They do better than the average kid.
Because he sets a foundation.
Yeah, you set a foundation. So you begin somewhere. You have a community and you work with that community, and then you build from there, as opposed to building it from the sky down, build it from the ground up. And I think that's the model for building any institution.
Well, on that note, let's just say, hopefully, maybe Dr. Umar Johnson will see this and he should start teaching out there, teaching somewhere, and get his school going. And then
I think he already has it. From what I understood, I've just asked some people in Dover, but from what I understood, he had a school down in Dover. And because I saw something once on YouTube or something. He was walking around saying this is the building and everything.
All right, well.
But the only thing, in this Pan-African thing, there really are no princes and kings and queens, really. We're trying to get away from that. We're trying to get to we're trying to get to the masses of our people. Because sometimes the king sold us out, not all the time.
Right.
But sometimes they sold us out. And sometimes they were so busy warring with other kings that Europeans came and did that divide and conquer thing.
Right.
So it's that idea that we have amongst us, this idea of this royalty business, I think that stands in the way because it blocks us from being able to do that sort of thing when you actually like when they would come, like the old people would tell me about it, tell us about it when we were kids. The teachers would come and they would teach and they didn't get paid any money.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody would board them in the house. Somebody would give them a room in the house, and people would pay them with eggs, and maybe sometimes somebody would bring them a chicken or vegetables from their garden and stuff like that. That's how they got paid. And after a while, the value of the thing became evident to the people, where they put their quarters and nickels and dimes together and pennies, and they would get something in a church. And that's kind of how it got started. Either you start you start with an existing institution,
Mhm.
and go from there, or you just, or you just get a bunch of kids on the street and deal with them on the street, and have have your ciphers on the street. That's a form of teacher education. That's a form of school. And so so these are different. The models it's all kinds of models there.
Definitely.
You don't have to start from the top and work your way down, but you can start from the bottom and work your way up. But I'm gonna check with some people in Dover, because I thought he had something down there in Dover.
And I'll check too. And so next time when we come on for the next episode, maybe we can start with an update on that, since I think it's important. So let's end with that. And for everyone listening to us right now on Apple Podcasts, if you want to see our faces, feel free to go to our website, fullcircleshow.com, and go to our YouTube page, and you can hear, you can put some faces to these voices. So brothers,
I don't know why.
thanks once again, brothers, and look forward to the next time.
Lord, yes, papi, hit me one time and make it funky.
I was brought up and told to have no fear.